the postmodern critique of modernism tends to like break down all sorts of categories and distinctions, and it tends to view those as being quote unquote socially constructed. So traditionally, both like in traditional, say, worldviews and also in most of modernity, people considered things like male and female and masculine and feminine and man and woman. Those were considered to be natural categories, right? Like if you're a male, you identify as a man. There's a difference between men and women. Of course, there are some cultural aspects of that. Not every culture, some cultures have like specific ways of like, what they consider acceptable male or female behavior or dress or whatever. But in general, the fact that there is a distinction is universal. And so most people normally have considered this to be something that's naturally occurring. Postmodern critiques tend to look very suspiciously at all such categories and to say they're not natural categories, they're just social constructs. So the fact that we separate men from women, or that we think that just because you have a male body physically, that you should also identify as a male psychologically, all of this is just like a social construct. And we need to break that down. We need to realize that things are much more complex than that. A person can have a male body but identify as a female psychologically, or have a female body and identify as a male psychologically. And if the two don't match up, which should take precedence? Is it the body that's telling the true story and your mind is kind of, out of whack with that, and you should try to bring the mind back into conformity with the body? They used to call it gender identity disorder. The idea is that there was something disordered in the mind, and you should try to like bring the mind back in conformity with the body. But the current paradigm, it puts the mind over the body and says if there's a incongruence, then the real story is really what the person is in the mind. So you are a female if you identify as a female. It doesn't matter whether you have a male or a female body, but it's by identifying psychologically, that's what's primary, right? And because that's taken as primary, it becomes very subjective, right? So if you no longer take male and female, like physical male and female, which is like we're a dimorphic species, right? You do have the phenomenon of intersex. There are some people who are born with ambiguous kind of like genitalia, and it's not clear whether they're male or female, but these are very exceptional cases, right? As a rule, we are a dimorphic species. We are male and female. And as long as that's where your starting point, then, you're going to see those as natural categories, and the social and psychological identification of one as being a man and a woman, you're going to see that as being naturally based on gender. But if you take the psychological to be primary, and you can identify as a male, you can identify as a female, you can identify as neither, you can identify as both, right? What you identify psychologically as, that's very subjective. And when you no longer take the biology here to be sort of a determinant of, what used to be considered a natural category, then, anything, like you open the gates to sort of all kind of different variations.
Wow.
So, I don't want to be either male or female, so I go by they. Like in English, just use the plural so that you avoid gendering me. Well, you say, well, what do you mean? Are you a male or a female? Well, that's irrelevant. My body doesn't matter. It matters like what I subjectively think of myself as in terms of my psychological self-identification, my social role, and all of this. And all of this is much more kind of like ambiguous and personal. And so this is kind of where you get this current trend of a plethora of different genders and gender identities and a whole slew of, different pronouns and things like this, right? Gender is seen as something that's elective, subjective, something that I can sort of project onto my reality, or something that's, that's one way of putting it, or something that's kind of generated within my psyche that may or may not be in conformity with my body. And there's no reason why it necessarily should be. It's its own autonomous thing. Again, things that are normally together, it's like they've been split apart. So your body and the sex of your body is now completely separate, seen as being completely separate from your psychological gender identification or your gender expression, right? How you express yourself in terms of dress and mannerisms and all of that. And we would say, no, these are supposed to line up normatively. They're supposed to line up. And if they don't, then there are obviously anomalous cases and this and that. I mean, we understand that. But as a normative issue, if you have a male body, normatively, you should also identify as a man, right, in society. And you should present as a man and be attracted to women, right? So on all four levels. And for a female, it's the same, but the opposite, right? But in the modern paradigm, you could have a male body and identify as male or female or neither. You could be attracted to either male or female or both or whatever. Like that's also just an open question. And then you could express yourself however you want. You might be a male and attracted to women, but you want to wear a skirt and nail polish. And that should be perfectly fine. Of course, for us, that's haram. Like it's haram to actually imitate the opposite sex in your dress and your...
One thing I noticed is that, in this modern time, there's one more shift within society, which is the expectation from a man seems to be a little more different, which has changed an expectation from a woman. A woman now with the modern paradigm is expected to behave more like a man, and a man is expected to behave
Right.
more like a woman. So
Exactly. Yeah.
this is also that shifts, now when a woman is when many things are related to feminism, women are expected to, how can you be a housewife, how can you do this, you need to work, and these kind of paradigms are also
Mm-hmm.
pushed onto the females of the society, and men are men are looked at as toxic, you can't
Mm-hmm.
have this view or that view. This is also an aspect of modernity, would you say that?
Yes. Yeah. Of course. And I mean, modernity is like a long, like several hundred-year phenomenon, and these manifestations are all much more recent. But of course, seeds were set much earlier to get to this point. So,
Okay.
I would say that these are some of the fruits of of the modern project, and modern slash postmodern project too. Because again, postmodern, like in many respects, we're in a postmodern phase, and some of these things, especially this idea that there is no real external reality and that everything is kind of a social construct and all of that. This is not so much modernity as like postmodern. That's the postmodern critique,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
And I mean, in classical modernity, with empirical science in the driver's seat, like people were very much like, no, like you're male or female, and that's the physical body, and I've got proof, and here it is, and that was kind of very much the paradigm. Of course, the psychologization of the self and the coming to the fore of like the inner cycle. This started also, some time ago, and it's been developing, before Freud and through Freud and since then also. But yeah, I mean, this particular manifestation that we see today of this breakdown in the very idea of gender, and also gender norms, obviously, and sexual behavior and relationships, that whole constellation of issues, right? It completely breaks down as of like the 1960s for various reasons. But yes, I mean, definitely this is also a fundamental aspect of it.